Morning and good afternoon, dear participants, and welcome to this topical and important event for Kazakhstan's economics. We'll be talking about transforming sustainability into new business opportunities, enhancing Kazakh small and medium enterprises' capacity to access sustainable public procurement and broaden their markets. This event has been organized by the Cleaner and Resource Efficient Center of Ukraine, as well as the UN Environment Program to sustain transition towards the green economy in the Eastern Europe, Caucasus and Central Asia region. My name is Katerina Romanova. I represent the Recipe Center and I will be hosting today's event. I'll move on to the welcoming remarks, and it is now my pleasure to invite the Deputy Director of the Department of the Public Procurement Legislation and Quasi-Public Procurement Sector of the Ministry of Finance at the Republic of Kazakhstan, Mr. Yerlan Seitov. Please go ahead. The floor is yours. Yes, good afternoon, dear participants. Thank you very much. It is my pleasure to present myself. My name is Yerlan Seitov. I am the Deputy Director for the Department of Public Procurement and Quasi-Public Procurement Legislation at the Ministry of Finance of Kazakhstan. Right, so on behalf of the Ministry of Finance of the Republic of Kazakhstan, to greet you all here at this seminar, where we will be considering some of the principles of sustainable public procurement, I would like to express our gratitude to the UNEP regional office for organizing this event and for starting the discussion on the implementation of sustainable procurement principles, and for this opportunity to meet with market participants. The Ministry of Finance, as it develops state policy in procurement, is always striving to improve the fundamentals. The current legislation on public procurement allows the state to meet its demands for goods and services in terms of balancing quality and price throughout the entire life cycle of these products. And this positively impacts not only the overall price, but also the quality of services provided by the state. At the same time, the ministry is open to engage in a dialogue in terms of improving public sector procurement with an accent on environmental issues. As you might be aware, in September 2021, our president, in his address to the people of Kazakhstan, mentioned that environmental protection and environmental development are moving to the top of the agenda for the government. This issue is now tackled by the entire civilized world, and so we must also focus our attention on this issue. We understand that tapping into the potential of public procurement, which annually contribute to about 5 trillion tenge, will definitely stimulate manufacturers to innovate and to implement environmentally friendly solutions, restoring energy and resources, etc. At the same time, implementing sustainable elements in the public procurement sector must become part of public policy in terms of decarbonizing the economy, reducing its negative impact on the environment, and improving quality of life. Green environmental procurement for Kazakhstan is probably, well, I would say a new idea, a new term, but I've been devoting attention to it for some time now. With support from international organizations. And of course, we are definitely open to engage more productively in this issue. The experience of countries that have implemented green public procurement demonstrates that their introduction may lead to a number of positive consequences, such as a reduction in emissions, the abolishment of toxic substances, an increase in the amount of resources recycled, a reduction in the number of resources that end up in landfills, etc. Most developed countries have already implemented their national programs, increasing the percentage of green public procurements. Overall, the Ministry of Finance definitely supports the entire initiative, and we hope that with joint efforts, we will be able to develop an optimal approach towards sustainable public procurement in Kazakhstan with respect to the current trends in economic development. Overall, the existing policy on public procurement provides a mechanism for incentivizing green initiatives and for implementing new approaches. So the issue of implementing green procurement or developing new criteria for sustainable procurements needs to be taken up with the responsible bodies of the Republic of Kazakhstan, and we need to respect, of course, international experience. I want to wish all the participants of today's seminar to enjoy a productive 1.5 hours, a productive dialogue, and I wish you all the best for the rest of the day. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your support. And now I would like to move on to representing a person who's been over some 13 years working at UNOP, managing sustainable public procurements. Please welcome the program officer at the economy division of UNOP, Mr. Farid Yaker. Please, the floor is yours.
And then kind words you're mentioning. And also thanks, Yerlan, for this introductory remarks. I'm pleased to speak in this opening session today. And Kazakhstan is an important country for us. We visited Kazakhstan a few years back with a colleague from UNEP and had the first inception workshop on green public procurement and in Astana. And we noticed that there was a great interest in green procurement. It took a while before we could really start the project, but we're happy to see that now the conditions are in place really to make sure that Kazakhstan embarks on green public procurement and joins the global movement in the world. In UNEP, we're in charge of monitoring the progress of GPP, green public procurement, and sustainable public procurement at global level through the SDG 12.7, which is the Sustainable Development Goal target 12.7, which has an indicator, and this indicator is the number of countries that are developing or implementing SPP action plans. And we did the first data collection exercise this year, and we found out that 33 countries were indeed actively implementing sustainable public procurement. That is, they were really dedicated to green or to make the public procurement of their country more sustainable. So this means that they're using this enormous potential, which is public procurement, which is between 12 and something like 30% of GDP, of the gross domestic product. These are huge amounts. I mean, at world level, we're talking about something like $7.5 trillion of public procurement. If we turn a little portion of this, like say 5%, 10%, 15% of these enormous amounts, we turn that green, we can have an enormous impact on the three crises that we're facing: the climate, the nature, and the pollution. Currently, we have a meeting, a very important conference of parties in Glasgow. The whole international community is dedicated to making sure that we don't exceed a temperature increase of 1.5% or 2% in the current century. So this is a very important moment, because it's a moment where we are going to show that we're really dedicated, that we are sincere, that we mean it, because for our future generations, for all the inhabitants of the planet that are suffering from the consequences of global warming, for the countries that may disappear because of this threat, for all the trauma that we're starting to feel, and that may increase tremendously in the future. So I'm happy to see that Kazakhstan is putting environment on the top of its agenda. You can count on our support to accompany you on the path to sustainability. And the idea that you had, the focus that you're putting on inviting SMEs, on establishing this dialogue with SMEs is critical. We believe that sustainable procurement is about buying, but it's also about selling. And we want to have the right productive sector in the country. We want SMEs to be conscious of their role, to participate in the economy in a green way. And this workshop will really tell them about this opportunity that public procurement can offer. It will tell them about the efforts that the government is making, and it will lay the path for really a participation, an increased participation of SMEs in future public procurement, but in a green way. It will help them get conscious about the need to adjust their production methods, to switch to greener products in order to meet the challenges that we're facing today, and in order to meet also the future demand of the government, which is going to be greener. So you can count again on our support in this challenge, in making sure that this dialogue and this synergy will happen in your country in the future. But once again, thank you and congratulations for this meeting, and wish you really a very fruitful webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now it is my pleasure to invite Mr. Andrii Vorfolomeiev, the Director of the Resource Efficient and Cleaner Production Center, the organization that possesses a great deal of experience when it comes to environmental modernization of industrial enterprises. Please, Andrii, the floor is yours. Thank you, Katerina. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to the Ministry of Finance and to the United Nations Environment Program, since they are a shining light in terms of sustainable procurement, not only in Kazakhstan, but for the wider region as well. And we're talking about so many issues, such as rational resource and water consumption, energy efficiency, etc. These are all stepping stones to sustainable transformation, which Kazakhstan is striving for. And I want to remark on some of the steps that have been put in place by Kazakhstan, such as the Sustainable Development Strategy until 2050. And I want to remark on Kazakhstan's desire to act as a climate hub for Central Asia in terms of sustainable development, which the initiative of which has been mentioned at the COP26 summit in Glasgow. This means that we're talking about the transfer of technology, about innovation, about implementing sustainable initiatives, and this will take place not only at the level of the country, but will also spill out to the entire region. And obviously the Kazakh industry needs to be prepared for the green transformation. As mentioned, Farid, when we are talking about sustainable public procurement, we are talking not only about the side that is buying, but also the side that is producing, that may be participating. And it's best if the participants are representing the national economy, thus ensuring its transition to cleaner practices. We understand that there might be some resistance in terms of performing the transformation, so we need to act proactively so that the capacities of the national manufacturers are developed in advance. And although this might be a bit of a challenge for all the parties involved, for both the companies and the government, we believe this is entirely possible. Implementing energy efficiency in Kazakhstan is a positive example for many countries in the region. I am a professor here in Ukraine, and I remember well how our experts would travel to Kazakhstan to study positive practices in terms of energy efficiency. They used to do that to look at how the initiatives were starting, and now we are in communication in terms of seeing some of the outcomes and outputs of these transformations. So This goes to show how Kazakhstan can be a possible positive example also in terms of public procurement. On behalf of the Recipe Center and my colleagues, I can say that we are incredibly happy to share our experience in terms of implementing sustainable procurement as part of the UNEP program. Uh, it is a pleasure to be supporting this activity in the Eastern Europe, Caucasus and Central Asia region. With this seminar, we would like to talk about the importance of sustainable public procurement and lay the foundation for supporting the fulfillment of your potential as companies that can provide goods and services in line with sustainable procurement requirements. Apart from today's seminar, we will try to address all of your questions. We will also support companies throughout the country by providing consulting services. It is a free of charge offer, although with a limited circle of participants. Our experts, through online communication, will develop reports on your current conditions and will also suggest measures for further development. Companies will also receive certificates, but I think what's most important is that we will suggest new visions for the company's developments. I will have the opportunity to talk about this in greater detail, and I hope that this seminar will be useful to each and every one participating. Yes, thank you very much for the welcoming remarks, for your support. And now, so that our speakers have the opportunity to meet you better and to know what they need to stress on as they perform, I want to suggest that you take a poll, which should now appear on your screens. Right. So, first of all, I want to share a few comments on the results that we have on our screen. I am very happy that we seem to have an audience that is not indifferent when it comes to issues such as circular economy, sustainable procurement, and resource efficiency. But when it comes to criteria that describe what is sustainable in the context of public procurement, I can see that opinions differ, and helping us out to understand the differences will be the expert at the Resource Efficient and Cleaner Production Center with rich international experience, Mr. Johannes Fresner, who will talk about the contemporary approach to efficient, sustainable public procurement. So Johannes, please go ahead.
Thank you, Katerina. A very warm welcome also from my side. I'm Johannes Fresner. I'm a technical expert supporting the RECP Center in Kiev. The topic which I'll cover now in the next 15 minutes is sustainable public procurement as a modern approach to production and consumption. Why modern? Because the approach of sustainable public procurement is increasingly used by governments all over the world to lead by example, stimulating demand for environmentally friendly goods. What does environmentally friendly mean? It means goods which are basically not over-exploiting our planet, goods which are efficient in using resources and complying with what Farid has explained to us now in the light of COP26 in Scotland, also with our climate goals. So energy efficient goods, and I'm including services. Linking to the introduction of Minister Seitov, I'm glad to hear that this initiative has the strong and visible support of the Kazakh government, which is aware of its role in having an impact on the market and leading suppliers also towards more sustainable business practices. Why is it so important that public institutions lead by example? Public institutions are major consumers, considering that public institutions include not only municipalities or regional governments or national governments, but also institutions like schools, hospitals, and so on. I think we get a clear image about the buying power of public institutions. And if public institutions make good use of their buying power by targeting product services which comply with environmental criteria, social criteria as well, then really something can get going. In the framework of this initiative, public authorities seek to procure good services and works with a reduced environmental impact. We will explore now in the next 10 minutes what potentials this has for a better environment in the participating countries, and we will see the opportunities which arise out of these activities for small and medium-sized enterprises. It is worth for enterprises, for all of us, to study the criteria governments will apply and to accept these criteria as part of our business strategies. So with this presentation, I would also like to provide a few hints at potential starting points for enterprises who are aiming at participating in public procurement. Now, Farid has already given us a few numbers. I would like to share with you just a few more numbers to paint a picture of the enormous purchasing power which is exerted by public institutions, by government, municipalities, public institutions like schools, hospitals, and so on and so on. On average, talking about OECD countries, we are talking about 12% of overall GDP, which is at the hands of public institutions. In some countries, this is even more. In some countries, it's up to 30%. Minister would probably have the exact numbers characterizing the economy in Kazakhstan. Maybe this is something for the discussion then. There are different numbers. We have heard 9 trillion USD as the market which is governed by public procurement. Other numbers give the market as up to 13 trillion. We could divide this by the number of people who are currently living on this planet. This is still a significant number, even per head. Just to characterize numbers which I know better, obviously being an Austrian citizen, 2 trillion spent by public authorities in the European community. And the conclusion is apparent. This is a huge market in generally speaking. And assuming now that step by step, we can make part of this market sustainable, as examples here in Europe are showing. In some economies, 15, 20, 30% of this market is subject to tendering using sustainable criteria. Then we get an idea of the huge impact public procurement can have to spur the uptake of sustainable business model and sustainable products and services. Now, just to share a few more observations with you from a recent report of UNEP. These data are from 56 countries on this planet. More than 90% of them are considering sustainable public procurement as part of their strategy, as part of their policies, and most of them actually have also criteria included in their purchasing procedures. On the right-hand side of these slides, to get a clearer idea of which products we are talking about, sustainable procurement criteria mainly used for IT, for office materials, office paper, for vehicles, for services, and for buildings and the process of designing and constructing buildings. What are the criteria national governments are using in their procurement? Now, talking about sustainable criteria, leading criteria regarding resource efficiency. We will explore this concept in a minute. Ivan is discussing this with you in detail. This is followed by energy efficiency. This is related to climate change also. So these are, in a nutshell, the most important criteria. Equally important for us is to know what the future will bring, to fine-tune our strategies accordingly. According to the interviewed representatives of national governments, more than two-thirds actually of interviewees are sure that sustainable public procurement will become even more important in the near future. And in these criteria will become important, like we have already discussed, climate change, to become more energy efficient, to use renewable energy, to become resource efficient, main criteria increasingly used by governments in public procurement. Now, practically, what does resource efficiency mean as a vision, as a concept? Our present economy, and I'm not telling you anything new at this point, is pretty much a linear economy. We extract resources from our planet, we process them into products, we use the products happily to increase our standard of living, and at the end of the useful life of the product, we discard it to the environment. So we take resources, we process them into a product, we use the product, some products longer, many products just for a very short useful life, and in the end we discard of them. And the associated problem, of course, is as we are doing so, we are depleting resources and we are causing pollution. We are causing pollution to the environment, discarding more or less hazardous substances. We are discarding carbon dioxide, which is the main cause for the climate change we are experiencing. And the activities of resource efficient and cleaner production now in the long term shall change this. We want to turn this linear model, and the associated concept is circular economy, into a circular model for our economy, in which we keep resources as long as possible by employing different strategies, by optimizing production to minimize waste and emissions, by reducing the use of hazardous substances, which later on make recycling of materials very difficult, by providing by design for a long useful life of products, by providing infrastructure to collect, to repair, to reuse products. And in the end, by collecting in a meaningful way all the materials which have become obsolete and introduce them again in our economy to replace resources. So this model, of course, is a vision of an ideal future without extracting resources from this planet and without discharging pollution into the environment. And Sustainable Public Procurement now wants to support this sustainable transformation by developing markets for products and services which meet criteria which help us in reaching this vision. So less waste, higher energy efficiency, use of recycled materials are relevant criteria, which are then correspondingly used as purchasing criteria in sustainable public procurement. Now, what is in it for you? Companies which comply with this vision and with the resulting criteria have an attractive market position because they are one step ahead. It's a big opportunity to participate in this, because more and more authorities will ask for products in their tenders which comply with this vision of a sustainable development, sustainable economy. And they will do so, and we will discuss this in a minute, by asking for eco-labeled products and by asking companies to implement environmental management systems. Participating in this has other benefits as well. Meeting the criteria of sustainable public procurement helps to support future legal compliance, to reduce risks, and it helps, and this Ivan will explore together with us, to become financially more efficient and more sustainable. The logos you see on the right-hand side of the picture are just public procurement programs as they are currently used in the Ukraine, the Prosoro, and in Berlin, the NABE, and in Vienna, capital of Austria, the EcoKauf program, which covers a significant part of public purchasing in Austria and also in Germany. I was also mentioning what we should keep on our radar as a preparation. I would like to recommend to you to have an eye on eco-labels, to study, to familiarize yourself with the criteria which are laid down in the different requirements, because they summarize everything about phasing out the use of hazardous chemicals, being more energy efficient, being more water efficient, reducing waste, and to start preparing at least an environmental management system which organizes your environmental activities with a clear focus. And just to summarize the advice we take the freedom to deliver to you, prepare and start early to make use of these huge opportunities. It will take some time to meet the criteria of eco-labels, as we need to substitute hazardous materials. We probably need to configure our packaging in a little bit different way. We should prepare for efficient use of water and energy over the life cycle of the products and services we provide, and to build an environmental management system in a functioning way requires the implementation of quite a few elements, which I'm not presenting to you in detail now. Simply, my conclusion is preparation to participate in sustainable public procurement may be an effort. It takes some time, but in any case, it's profitable on the long term. And this project would like to support you during the first steps of preparing and participating, and how this project can support you. Andrii will then explore together with you in his conclusions. Yeah, at this point, thank you very much for your participation, and I'm looking forward to questions in case there are any. In any case, I'm handing back to Katarina.
Thank you very much, Johannes, for helping us find our footing when it comes to sustainable procurements. I would like to remind you, as Johannes rightfully pointed out, if you happen to have any questions, any comments to the speakers, please feel free to drop them in the chat so that we can address them at the end of the event. Now, to talk about where Kazakhstan is in terms of its preparation to introduce SPP, I would like to invite Mr. Kuanysh Baltabaev to speak, a person who has worked a lot on evaluating Kazakhstan's preparedness and is the head of the OGL EcoJer in Kazakhstan. Yes, good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you very much, Katerina, for inviting me to speak. Right, so as has been pointed out, I am the executive director of the EcoJer Federation. And in this position, I have been in this position since last year. We have been implementing a project to assess the current level of preparedness. And we have also looked at the legislative framework that Kazakhstan currently has. We have checked if Kazakhstan's legislation is or is not in line with the principles of sustainable procurement. This project was implemented as part of a Bayesian funda as part of our fund's mandate. And this slide represents what have we done over the year. So we have analyzed various documents and policy documents that have to do with sustainable procurement in Kazakhstan. We've also run a poll among companies participating in public procurement. And then the second part of the report focused on the expert review of our legislation in Kazakhstan. If we talk about some of the main policy documents, Kazakhstan has its own public planning system, and this slide represents the hierarchy of the documents governing it. The most important strategic planning document is Kazakhstan's development strategy until 2050, which forms the basis for national priorities, various sectoral plans and initiatives, etc. The Kazakhstan 2050 strategy outlines a number of main directions. And when it comes to developing sustainable approaches and the principles of a sustainable economy, it outlines as one of the main initiatives the fact that the rational consumption of natural resources needs to be ensured. Kazakhstan also needs to transform the energy complex of the country, which is currently quite carbon intensive. About 70% of our energy system is coal-based. And as has been mentioned, as Johannes has already mentioned, Kazakhstan is indeed watching attentively international trends, and it has foreseen the need to develop environmental brands and for them to be promoted because sustainable goods are definitely more popular. The demand for them is higher. They are trusted more by consumers, and thus they support the economic development of the country. So the strategy's implementation has been happening for a while now. The concept to help Kazakhstan to pass to the green economy has been developed recently, and it foresees 7 of the main pillars. But since these issues do not relate directly to public procurement, I will not be focusing on them right now, and I will move on to the next slide. And now we are passing to specifically discussing public procurement. Here are some figures on the screen. Currently, public procurement is performed through open tenders with preliminary qualification. There is the option to make requests for proposals. These can also be performed at commodity markets, as well as through the option of procuring from a single source. And the analysis we've run at the beginning of this year indicates that most procurements go through the process of procuring from a single source. And it has been mentioned by the participants that this modality limits competition in the market and leads to a certain level of mistrust in the procedures that are carried out. The analysis that we've run shows that currently sustainable procurement is in place partially in Kazakhstan, but not all of the sustainability criteria are equally important when the procurements take place. For example, more than half of the people we polled have suggested that economic aspects are at the fore when it comes to their priority, and about a quarter of those who we talked to have mentioned that social aspects are stressed on. Environmental aspects seem to have been remarked by less than 10% of those we have polled. And indeed, if we consider the legislation, this is a fair assessment. There is a correlation. When it comes to social aspects, it seems that the Kazakhstan procurement system, it is incredibly important to involve local suppliers, to ensure that jobs are created in the regions, also for people with disabilities. So these things are explicitly expressed in the legislation, while environmental issues are not as well formulated. So preferences are put in place and support systems are in place for compliant providers. If we talk about economic aspects, obviously, the main rule is that all the competitions, all the tenders that take place under the public system are primarily oriented at ensuring best value for money. So usually the most successful bidder is the company that provides the service meeting the quality criteria at the lowest price. And this slide nicely reflects these ideas. As you can see, the largest number of poll participants agreed that the price is the determining factor. We've run a scale where 1 indicates that people mostly disagree, while 6 indicates full agreement. And as you can see, the highest mark, 4.56, has been attributed to the statement that the price is the determining factor in public procurement. Also, another additional important factor that seems to limit the implementation of sustainable procurement is the fact that currently Kazakhstan does not have a sufficient number of suppliers who would be able to meet sustainable procurement criteria. And I have to agree with this assessment. This is correct. Most companies, most economic entities currently run into significant obstacles when meeting sustainability criteria. They would need to direct investment into this issue, while at the same time, they are not sure, they do not feel confident that moving into the area of sustainability, they will be able to continue making a profit and will continue being able to, say, secure public procurements. So these two factors seem to be the main barriers that are currently preventing sustainable procurement from developing more actively in Kazakhstan. This slide represents the level of awareness and familiarity with various terms in the area of sustainable procurement. And as you can see, the most accessible, the most readily understandable topic is efficient procurement. I want to stress that this term is used in current Kazakh legislation. The various criteria of efficient procurement, the efficient use of budget funds is one of the one of the most important KPIs for everyone involved in public procurement. Obviously, thus the idea of efficiency resonates with our civil servants who are involved in procurement at the municipal level, as well as for the civil servants working at the national level in the central authorities. At the same time, issues such as sustainable development, green procurement, sustainable procurement seem to be quite vague for our civil servants. They are buzzwords, so to speak. They are circulated around and used quite actively, but it seems that the people we have polled are not entirely sure that they know what these terms mean in their entirety. At the same time, we have been able to remark that specific criteria, sporadic criteria that would fall under the idea of sustainable procurement, for example, they are used, but still the most familiar term is efficient procurement. As we ran our analysis, we also asked the participants to tell us to what extent procurement divisions are able to exercise sustainable public procurement, and about 50% of our respondents are convinced that the current competence and capacity of procurement officials and the existing legislation will allow, with a few factors in place, to perform sustainable procurement more efficiently and more actively. And in relation to this, we also asked for our respondents to share their opinions on the factors that could facilitate the implementation of sustainable procurement, and 41% of our respondents said that international trends and Kazakhstan's desire to meet OECD principles may become a strong factor contributing to the modernization of Kazakh legislation and to the implementation of sustainable procurement principles. Also, some of the leaders among these contributing factors are specific goals for improving the environmental conditions and protecting the environment. Kazakhstan is now undergoing an overarching environmental reform. We have put a new environmental code in place. It's been enacted early in 2021, and we are aiming at making sure that we become carbon neutral by 2050. And our respondents seem to believe that all of these factors may contribute to making sustainable procurement more actively used throughout the public procurement system. Here we are talking about factors that need to be improved and to support the implementation of sustainable procurement. Most of our respondents believe that legislation needs to be improved, that tools need to be put in place to support sustainable public procurement, that webinars and seminars need to be provided. So when we're talking about support tools, our respondents mostly mean some sort of governmental support to offset the investment that needs to be diverted, that needs to be performed. Our investors will be looking for reassurance. If we're talking about public officials involved in procurement, they have stressed that it's important for them to receive additional training to develop their capacity on the issue of sustainable procurement. There are currently many various concepts and criteria around, and public officials do not always have the opportunity to really get to grips with all the new trends, to understand what sort of criteria can be applied to declare certain goods as sustainable. They are not sure how you can discern between actually sustainable goods and goods that are just greenwashing. So they need to develop their capacity. They need to become better versed, so to speak, in all of these modern trends and tendencies. Thus, we see that we need to raise people's awareness, and we also need to put in place some support mechanisms to stimulate manufacturers to become more sustainable. Okay, I will then move on to what I feel is most important in the second part. We currently see that the current system regulating public procurement in Kazakhstan, it does, in a way, reflect environmental, social, and economic aspects as it is foreseen by the system of sustainable procurement, but the ecological and social aspects are stressed more when it comes to economic aspects. We are, for example, when it comes to environmental aspects, the legislation is already mentioning that goods that have been manufactured, that have been made from recycled materials have to be prioritized. But if you go into the bylaws, you will see that the procedure for implementing this idea is not specified. So this aspect is not very well translated into practice. Moving on to the conclusions and the recommendations, we see that in order to implement the principles of sustainable public procurement in Kazakhstan, we need to obviously develop the capacity of public officials through training events, through perhaps creating a database that they could use as a reference point, through providing expert support, and this is probably what your project will be involved in. We also need to identify the procurement instances that can be shifted towards sustainable procurement and perhaps be performed as pilot initiatives to check the readiness of the market and to assess what needs to be done to stimulate the market. Based on this, we will probably need to suggest a few amendments to the public procurement law as well as its supporting bylaws. I think briefly that will cover it all, and I will be happy to address any questions that the participants might have. Thank you very much, Mr. Baltabaev. I think we will have time to address questions at the end of the event. Dear participants, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them into the chat. Thank you very much for this profound assessment of the public procurement system in Kazakhstan. Now we have reached the second poll of the day. We have medium and small enterprises represented among the participants today, and we would like to hear what you think about your current level of preparedness to participating in sustainable public procurement. So you have your next 3 questions on the screen. Right. We already have our results on the screen. So let's see what you're telling us. Right, we can see that sustainable public procurement for you will represent new opportunities to move to perhaps into perhaps the international market, which will ensure your continuous competitiveness. Also, according to your answers in the second question, it seems that some of you have made some inroads in terms of assessing sustainable public procurement. This goes to show your great potential. And speaking about your current needs, it seems that almost all the participants are interested in improving the economic and environmental indicators of their manufacturing. Right, this goes to show that our seminar is definitely on the agenda and is meeting your needs quite obviously. Right, our next speaker, Ivan Omelchuk, the expert of the Resource Efficient and Clean Production Center, will tell us which steps businesses need to take in order to achieve and in order to meet the criteria of sustainable public procurement. As it had been mentioned, eco-labeling is one of the main issues relating to sustainable procurement. So Ivan will be helping us make sense of it all. Right, first of all, I would like to express my gratitude to the audience for their huge level of activity. It seems that our audience is quite advanced and well aware of the fundamental issues of sustainability. We will not be devoting too much attention to the fundamentals. Great. So, sustainable development. We understand that the main aspect is about social, environmental, and economic issues, but what do we need to understand when we're applying sustainable development to businesses? We have to understand that businesses have impacts, and these impacts can be both positive and negative. For instance, where a plant, a factory manufacturing pharmaceutical products. It creates positive benefits through its production. It also creates jobs, but in the process of production, it produces emissions, waste, water, etc. And obviously, one of the goals of sustainable development is to balance these various impacts. For this, we may apply internal instruments such as the concept of resource efficient and cleaner production that can be applied inside the manufacturing process, as well as external factors such as sustainable procurement. If we talk about sustainable procurement specifically, I tried to come up with a presentation that would be interesting both for companies already engaged in public procurement as well as for those who are just at the early stages of this process and are currently involved in the B2B process. If we focus on the B2B system, sustainable procurement is also on the agenda here. There are multiple examples that you're probably aware of, and I'm going to mention one of them. There's this approach where a popular retail network will stipulate requirements for its suppliers. The more sustainable their production is, the more orders they will receive from the retailer. If we talk about the experience of our recipe center, we support two companies that supply produce to one of the larger French brands, and this branch has implemented its sustainable development strategy until 2025, and they formulated a goal for themselves to reduce CO2 intensiveness, to reduce the amount of waste, and thus all of their suppliers need to adapt their business processes to meet these requirements. Thus, we can see that sustainable procurement is definitely on the agenda for your commercial partners. If we talk about B2G, we're talking about sustainable public procurement in great detail today. One of its aspects being green public procurement, and we'll be talking about some of the evaluation criteria that might be applied. We will be focusing on the life cycle of the project, and we will try to differentiate between the life cycle when applying for first type eco-labeling, and also we will talk about how life cycle assessment is used when generating a procurement contract. We will also touch on the issues of eco-labeling, and we will consider each of the existing eco-labels. As we move on, I would like to perhaps focus your attention on a third stakeholder that has a great deal of pull in this whole triad. We're talking about the public represented by consumers. Here's the data that we have. Johannes has already talked about public procurement, and I will be focusing on a beautiful research that has been performed by the Association of Responsible Consumers. Over 20 years, they have tracked changes in consumer preferences, and as you can see, a significantly larger amount of money is now being spent on sustainable goods, the favorites being food and beverages. Then the next category is household appliances, such as LED lighting, more sustainable chemical solutions, etc. Transport comes in P3. The next research, I'm not going to dwell too much on it. This is talking about what consumers are looking for. They're looking for economic aspects. And it's also important to stop on what they expect from businesses. They seem to stress that businesses will be shielding responsibility, will be assuming responsibility for their impact on the environment. Also, this research goes to show that consumers are prepared to pay more for environmentally friendly goods. Only in 41% of instances, only 41% of consumers are prepared to pay more for an environmentally friendly product. Also, a different research here, I want to focus your attention on the final indicator. 74% of respondents believe that businesses have to take the initiative and move forward with changes without waiting for governments to support them. So for Kazakhstan, this is probably also interesting. it's also interesting to see, since our Kazakh colleague, Mr. Baltabaev, has told us that sustainable public procurement have a great deal of potential in Kazakhstan, but at the same time, legislation seems to be lacking. So this goes to show that there are lots of perspectives for sustainable public procurement to be implemented. I want to stress for you, representing companies, that your consumers are already expecting that you implement change. Here we're talking about businesses' reactions. 98% of companies now believe that sustainable development issues are priorities, while 74% believe that the implementation of sustainable development initiatives will support the improvement of their financial indicators. So what are the conclusions that we can arrive to based on these polls? We can see that consumers are devoting a great deal of attention to sustainable production, responsible consumption. At the same time, they shift responsibility from themselves onto businesses. And thirdly, they say that companies do not have to wait for changes in legislation in order to implement these positive practices. Now, what are the factors that can support us, regardless of the fact whether you engage with public procurement or if you are engaged in public procurement in the B2B sector? Sustainable procurement in the B2B sector. We will be focusing on various operational expenses, indirect expenses. The more inefficient your equipment is in terms of energy, the more energy you will be consuming, the more funds you will be spending. Also, equal, just labor conditions, administrative expenses, as well as investing into making sure that you save in the future. So the sooner you invest in energy efficient equipment, for example, the faster you will be able to return these investments. Also, using repaired elements, the possibility of secondary use, as well as investing into liquidation of negative consequences. Here we're talking already about circular procurement. When you have a sufficient basis of a sufficient pool of suppliers, then obviously criteria can become more stringent. If the pool is limited, then obviously additional criteria need to be put in place to stimulate companies towards engaging in this sort of relations. And finally, it's important to that contracts explicitly state environmental and social responsibilities and social obligations. Now, if we move on to sustainable public procurement, we have to understand that businesses mostly focus on generating income, while the state, the government, is focused on ensuring the rights and freedoms of its citizens. Also, when it comes to economic prosperity, and an incredibly useful tool for implementing this policy is sustainable public procurement. So what are the criteria that can be used to evaluate goods and services offered by commercial companies? What do we need to be aware of? So first of all, your price is going to be assessed, and this has been mentioned by colleagues who spoke before, lifestyle value, or the cost plus lifestyle cost in combination with other criteria. I think there's no point for us to dwell a great deal on cost. Let's focus on what the life cycle of a product is. We're talking about taking into account all the stages of the product's generation and use. We're talking about resources extraction, actual goods manufacturing, transportation, and the product's life after the consumer has stopped using it. Remember, in the very first slide, we talked about the company's impact. Through segmentation throughout the lifestyle, we can also assess the entire impact of the company. So in terms of production, it may be consuming water, energy, and contributing to environmental pollution. You can also be infringing on the rights of the community. If you have service roads that are actively used by heavy vehicles, then obviously the vibrations and noise may be contributing to a reduced life quality to the communities. If we're looking at the economic aspect, then we're talking about fair competition, value for money, etc. We have to understand the differences between two main directions. The evaluation of the life cycle is used when certification is performed, for example, for receiving eco-labeling of the first type. Then when you're assessing the cost of the life cycle cost as part of procurements, be they B2G or B2B, we run the life cycle cost calculation. And what are the elements that contributed to it? We're talking about obtainment expenses, transport expenses, installation expenses, that have to do with operational issues, utilization, and etc. etc. So if we're talking about procurement, that's the easy one. If we're talking about exploitation, we're talking about energy resources. If we're talking about disposal, we need to understand how much the disposal will cost, whether the final product can be sold, etc. As an example, I want to present the calculated cost of LED lamps provided by various brands, taking into account their whole life cycle. We're talking about 4 different brands. The first column represents the cost, the price of this lamp. It's represented in the Ukrainian hryvnia. Then the second and third column represents their various characteristics, such as the luminous flow and the energy consumption. Then the fourth column represents the common denominator, how many watts we need to ensure the luminous flow. Then comes the cost of electricity, the period of time that the procuring party can expect to use the lamp. And then the final column represents the ultimate life cycle cost. So as you can see, at the earliest stage, brand number 2 represents the most accessible LED lamp. So if we're simply using the criteria of the price, it will be brand number 2 that wins. But in view of the technical characteristics of the lamps, in view of how much energy will be consumed to generate the luminous flow, we can see that the life cycle cost leads us to a different evaluation. It will be brand number 3, representing us with the best solution. So there you have it. This is how this methodology can be used in public procurement, and you can feel free to use it also in the B2B sector. Also, additional criteria can be used. So I recommend that you acquaint yourselves with these criteria at the green procurement website of the European Union. They are broken down into categories. Each of the categories includes a number of documents. These are technical documents explaining the criteria, and the criteria are also divided into several levels, such as the basic level and the more advanced strategic level. You can also use the matrix of non-cost criteria. Here I've used the example of procuring paper. I've reduced the matrix to a great extent. I've only included a single indicator for each of the criteria. So we consider effectiveness, quality, environmental impact, safety, and the next slide will will follow this table up. So what can I say briefly? In terms of efficiency, what is the indicator that we're interested in? We want to see that recyclable materials are used. Then it indicates the document that regulates this issue, such as the technical regulations, ISO, EN. Then you justify why this specific criterion needs to be applied. We say that to manufacture an A4 paper, 80 cubic grams of wood are used. How this can be corroborated? This can be corroborated by a declaration in line with the ISO 14021 standard, and the indicator needs to be no less than 75%. So then you move on to quality, class plus. This is corroborated by an ISO document. The justification is the price. The corroboration is the quality certificate indicating the class and the characteristic of the paper. Then we move on into safety. I've also abridged this. I focus on chlorine. The regulatory document is obviously the technical regulation for production, because chlorine is a dangerous substance. Obviously, this will need to be corroborated in terms of a document provided by the manufacturer, and the indicator that we are interested in is seeing that chlorine is not used. Now, moving on to environmental protection indicators. The indicator is sustainable woods management. The regulatory document is the requirements to the value chain in line with FSC standards or PEFC standards, and we will require certificates and labeling. Right, so we see that these matrices and criteria can allow to step away from a purely price-determined policy for the lot that you want to procure, for the goods that you want to obtain. This significantly improves the quality of the procurement. This significantly improves the quality of sustainable procurement. If we're talking about public procurement, this will allow to improve the fairness of these procurements, because we're talking about the use of governmental funding. These goods will then end up used by hospitals and schools, and obviously we are seeking for high quality, environmentally friendly goods. Right, we move on to the issue of eco-labeling. There is a clear interrelation between sustainable public procurement and eco-labeling. They can use eco-labeling as an indicator. So obviously, no specific eco-label should be used preferentially, but still certain elements of eco-labeling can be used when formulating requirements to the goods. In terms of eco-labeling, the label is applied, demonstrating that it is in line with certain requirements in terms of environmental friendliness. The main type of eco-label is eco-label type 1, which is supported by a certificate, a label, and is enforced by an accredited organization with relevant experience. And let's talk about this in more detail. Kazakhstan has its organization that can provide a type 1 eco-label, a member of the International Network for Eco-Labeling. So it's a ramified network. The basis of this type 1 eco-label, life cycle assessment, which we've already considered before, and I think the contacts of the international network are indicated here. Feel free to use them. Here's the association as it is represented in Kazakhstan, the International Academy of Ecology, so you can get in touch with them. And if you want your products to be certified, you can approach them and see which stages you will need to go through. There is also another group of labels which do not apply full life cycle assessment. Also, only specific segments are assessed. For example, Energy Star indicates energy efficiency. Also, the confidence in textiles label is represented here, which is focused on textiles being produced in under relevant conditions. And then there's the FSC initiative, which is focused on making sure that the products are meeting quality criteria, they are renewable, and they can be used later for manufacturing paper, etc. So there are also environmental pledges of the second type, which is purely voluntary. Companies declare how much renewable materials are used. Then there are also environmental commitments of the third type, which involve more detailed assessments with the involvement of external organizations, where more extensive information is provided on the energy indicators, the energy consumption, etc., so that the consumer is able to acquaint themselves with this data. And there's also a number of additional environmental labels. So these labels are focused on the fact that, say fair trade criteria were used. Nothing, the product has not been tested on animals, etc. So there are numerous labels, and it's good to know your way around them. Each of these certification systems has its own catalogs, where you can check which brands and which companies have undergone the certification. And now I want to also touch on the path that each of your companies can select. There are a number of points that you can focus your attention on. You can run a self-assessment, sort of go into self-declaration and inform your partners of it. You can engage an external party. So if you approach the recipe center, for example, on a number of indicators, we can help you, and we can assess the efficiency of your company. And then comes independent certification, where you obtain a relevant certificate from an institution, from one of the institutions that I've mentioned before, and thus you will be able to use this certificate to apply for tenders, to apply for sustainable procurements and green procurements. Right, it's now time for conclusions. So the conclusions are pretty obvious. The topic of sustainable public procurement is on the agenda. As you can see, consumers are expecting that more and more sustainable goods will be entering the markets. Businesses are saying this is efficient and useful. So we are inviting you all to collaborate, join our projects, and let's implement sustainable procurement in our business processes. Right. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm wishing you a pleasant day ahead. Yes, thank you very much, Ivan. Are there any tools to support businesses that wish to implement sustainable public procurement? Andrii Vorfolomeiev will help us out, the director of the Recipe Center in Ukraine. Yes, definitely. Support systems are in place, and we will be developing these support systems for companies in Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Ukraine as part of the project that is supported by the United Nations Environment Program. So I will just briefly announce. We can clearly see that I have no time to speak in line with our agenda, so I will just very briefly talk about some of the technicalities of our engagement, and perhaps you will use this time to prepare some of your questions. So let's touch on the most important issues. I want to remind you that all of this is taking place as part of the project supported by the United Nations Environment Program, with support from the United Nations Development Account. And our project contains two components. The first one is focused on sustainable procurement, and our focus is not on helping the government in terms of developing its capacity, but we are focused on supporting companies, making sure that they are ready to engage with the system, making sure that their goods and services meet sustainability criteria. Which have been briefly represented by Ivan. This is, of course, a very complex topic, and for each company, the criteria will be individually formulated. And in closer engagements, we will be able to understand what the requirements for each company is. We will be putting in place an action plan for the company's development. The second component of our project is developing a platform for resource efficient and cleaner production, the iGo platform, which will help you on a global scale to find solutions in a language, in the language that you speak, to come up with solutions that match your profile. So through an online platform where you put in your data and you will receive information on support available and experts that you can get in touch with. This is a completely separate element of the project. But still, I think the iGo platform might be very interesting for you. Please feel free to reach out to us and get in touch on that topic, and we will share information on this element. So just a few words on our center. We were established in 2013, and our main goal is to support resource efficient and cleaner production. I will not be talking too much about this, but we're focused on efficiently using water, raw materials, and energy, minimizing pollution and emissions. We have supported more than 170 companies with energy audits, assessments, etc. And we engage directly with each of these companies, and the outcomes of the measures that we've suggested are represented on screen right now. These are not only things that we suggested. These are specifically measures that have already been implemented. So, and we are happy to provide our expertise to this project so as to provide consultancy for companies in Kazakhstan to help them prepare for sustainable procurement. So this service will be provided as part of the project. And as we engage with various companies, we will analyze their environmental, social, and economic profile, so to speak. We will look into the percentage of secondary materials used in manufacturing, or we will be looking at the number of jobs provided for people with disabilities. We will be looking into whether the company has had stable financial indicators over the last few years, because this is also a criterion. The list of criteria is extensive. The criteria are different, and we will be getting in touch with companies and leading them through this path to see what they need to address first in order to meet sustainable procurement criteria. And we will be focusing not only on the company itself, but also on the product, on the goods. We will be considering whether eco-labeling needs to be applied. We've seen, based on the poll, that eco-labeling does not seem to be on the agenda for you. It was an indicator close to 0%, while eco-labeling is one of the ways to certify that your goods are in line with sustainable procurement requirements. Without eco-labeling, your products might not qualify, and thus you will be losing access to a significant sector of the market when sustainable procurement is put in place. And sustainable procurement is on the rise in our countries as well. So what the companies will receive as an outcome of our engagement, they will receive a brief report on their current condition, and this report will also list the measures, the suggested measures that need to be implemented in order for the company to be able to participate in sustainable public procurement. And if the company wishes so, we can also develop an action plan for the coming years, and obviously a participant certificate will be provided to the company. So the methodology, the process used, we will probably engage over about a month directly with the company. This does not mean we will be in touch on a daily basis, but I guess a certain active amount of communication will be taking place. It is important that the company engages with us actively, that it finds the time to communicate and to provide us with data. This is an issue of the company's development, so we hope we will be wishing. Our national and international experts will be engaging with you. They have a great deal of experience in sustainable public procurement. The modality with all the current limitations, obviously we will be communicating online. We are open to use any tools that you find comfortable, that you find useful. Thus, we will be engaging online, and obviously the report will be provided to you online as well. As an option, our experience suggests that sometimes companies wish to protect their confidentiality, and we are open to sign a non-disclosure agreement. Some companies stress how important it is that the confidentiality of data is preserved. We are open to engage with you on this. depending on what you wish to choose. We feel confidentiality should not be a great issue in this project because we will not be collecting as much data on your products. Usually, we do request information on how many goods are produced, what are the incomes, etc. Here, we are not focusing on that this much. We'll just be interested in whether you are breaking into the green or not, but still we are open to sign an NDA agreement if you wish to do so. And finally, here are the contacts. We have a partner in Kazakhstan. Please feel free to reach out to him directly. Here's his telephone and email. Also, feel free to get in touch with our coordinator, Nadia Shmigol. And there's also an online form that you can fill in, and then we will be reaching out to you. I am kindly asking my colleagues to copy this information into the chat for you to be able to use it. Right, so that briefly covers how we will be working in the future, how we will be helping you out. Unfortunately, we are only able to support 10 companies in Kazakhstan, but at the same time, I think it's going to be incredibly interesting, both for the companies and for ourselves, and for the government that is seeking to implement sustainable public procurement. We will be analyzing and we will be assessing to what degree each of the parties is prepared right now. If we go into pilot projects immediately, we sometimes encounter this issue that companies are unable to apply because, for example, they are not meeting eco-labeling requirements. Obviously, there are national eco-labels. You can also apply for eco-labels in neighboring countries, say in Russia or Ukraine. We have our own solutions, and we had experiences where a company applied for a Ukrainian eco label and then was able to export its goods to Israel because the two systems mutually recognize each other. Right, so this whole initiative represents a great deal of opportunities for you. Right, I think I will be finishing at this point, and if you happen to have any questions, we'll be happy to address them right now. Thank you. Thank you very much, Andrii, for your presentation. First of all, I would like to say thank you to all of the participants who have joined our workshop today, Transforming Sustainability into New Business Opportunities. Thank you very much for listening to us so attentively, and also thank you to the representatives of the government of Kazakhstan and of international organizations for your informative presentations. And to draw the conclusion of today's event, I would like to ask Andrii Vorfolomeiev to take this responsibility, Director of the Recipe Center in Ukraine. Yes, thank you very much, Katerina. If I would like to touch on questions once more. If you feel that you want to learn something, please feel free to get in touch with us later. We'll be sharing the recording of today's event. We have national partners in Kazakhstan to help us out, so feel free to reach out with however you wish. We were very pleased to see a high level of interest from you today. The topic is definitely very important, and I think it's important that we work not only at the level of central governments, but also at the level of individual companies in order to generate this additional capacity and to ensure that companies are able to develop in the right direction. We are now at the early stages of this process. We are early birds, so to speak, so things might seem a little unclear and undefined, but I'm sure that the outcomes are going to be perspective. We will have them by the new year, and then we will have further support projects in place based on the outcomes that we receive from this activity. So I would like to once more address the representatives of companies. Please do not ignore the opportunity of receiving support from our consultants. Please feel free to reach out. We'll be happy to engage with you. And this is going to be useful both for your companies and for our general understanding of how these initiatives can be implemented in your country, in the wider region, and in terms of how this can be developed into the future. So thank you very much to everyone who's participated today, and we will see you next time. Yes, thank you very much. So with this, I will announce that the event is coming to a close. This event, we hope, has been the first step to opening up new horizons for you. We hope that we will be engaging and cooperating productively and achieving positive outcomes in terms of implementing sustainable public procurement in the Republic of Kazakhstan. Thank you very much for participating, and we will see you next time.